Welcome to another episode of The Breakdown. One of the biggest items that has dominated the news over the last little while, and things finally started to calm down a little bit, but there's still some ongoing stuff, has to do with the Freedom Convoy that Alberta and Canada saw going on over the space of a couple of weeks. It caused so many problems that it actually caused the federal government to very briefly invoke the Emergencies Act. And there's a whole lot to unpack around the convoy. There's going to be conversations and probably PhD dissertations written about it for quite some time. But one of the things that we wanted to explore a little bit, because it's probably one of the more important parts of the conversation, has to do with where did they get all the money to buy their inflatable jacuzzis and bouncy castles. And in order to get a little bit of a better understanding, there's a group of folks that have been taking a look at some data that became available in regards to the finances. And we're very excited to be speaking with one of those people today, Chad Ohman has been analyzing the financial data that I'm going to say became available a little while ago. We're going to talk about the how of that in a little bit. But first of all, Chad, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Nate. It's great to be here. Pleasure to be here.
So to start with, one of the things that I think is important to kind of talk about is the fact that the Freedom Convoy it went through a fascinating evolution of its own, because when it first started, it was operating under the very clear mandate that they took a memo of understanding and they wanted the Governor General to just say, this democratically elected government, enough with it. We're going to get rid of the government. It's going to be the Senate and the Governor General, and then a group of people from the Freedom Convoy who are going to form the new governing body of Canada. So to be very, very clear, it's really important to highlight that from the get-go, this organization was formed with the goal of overthrowing the federal government. Now, they realized a little bit later down the road that message wasn't necessarily resounding as much as they'd hoped, and they were getting some pushback on it, so they walked it back. But that's where it started. And they formed this trucker convoy to get all the way across Canada and all meet up in Ottawa and play with inflatables, I guess. But that costs a lot of money. So to start with, Chad, can you talk a little bit about the GoFundMe situation that they had when they started up?
Yeah, interestingly enough, the GoFundMe that they initially kicked off with Tamara Leach, or how do you say her name? I think she was a secretary with the Maverick Party. They put together this GoFundMe, and it raised something like $12 million before it was shut down. All that money ended up, GoFundMe initially decided that they would allow people to just, pull their money out, no worries. And then eventually they decided, we're just going to refund everybody, because it was probably turning into a big logistical nightmare. There was some spin-off fundraisers that happened through the platform as well, but not as many of them kind of took off. And then eventually, GoFundMe decided that enough was enough, and they weren't going to entertain any more of these fundraisers. So the organizers ended up looking at what they would call a Christian fundraising website called Give, Send, Go. And they were very happy to be their platform. And unfortunately, probably because they're a smaller site, the data that they were collecting on all the donations and that were left in a public Amazon container. So it was just a matter of pointing your browser to the container, and there it was.
Now, before we get into the Amazon container thing, I want to just sort of dial things back, because I know that I'm not a very technical person. My understanding is that there were some concerns raised with Give, Send, Go's security protocols before the convoy decided that they were going to make them their fundraiser du jour. Did you hear anything about that at all, or?
Not before. I mean, I hadn't heard of this website ever before, but
I don't think many people had.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. But there was concerns raised by the same organization that pull all the data from the Freedom Convoy fundraiser. They said, we warned you, and they didn't do anything about it. So off they went and pulled the rest of the data.
Now, when you say Amazon container, the immediate thing that comes to mind for me is a cardboard box with a little smiley face on it, and I have a feeling that's not what you're talking about. So, for the non-technical folks who are out there, myself included, what are you referring to when you talk about an Amazon container?
Yeah, so this data was Amazon has their Amazon Web Services. It's they have data centers all over the world, and most organizations do use them because they're low cost, and they have various different services like data storage and archival, and they do AI stuff, and like the sky's the limit. It's crazy. It's a pretty big cash cow for Amazon. A huge part of the market is this Amazon Web Services. But where the data was stored was in what's called S3, and it's basically where you can place files and then either privately have them downloaded or publicly downloaded. So you would as a regular user of the internet, you're by and large called anonymous, but you're really not. You're being tracked everywhere you go. But in terms of accessing this data, you would be an anonymous user, and really it's a matter of just turning that feature off in S3, and that's something Give Send Go didn't do. And instead, anyone could access these files. So it was just a matter of someone finding the container, just a web address that they would have had for it, and probably the directory just listed everything, and it was just a matter of right click, save as, save as, save as.
Okay. So would it be fair to say, for the simpletons like me, that it's kind of like I have a Google Drive, and if I want to store something on the internet machine, then I can put it up in my Google Drive, and I can choose to select it as this is private, this is only for me, or I can choose to share it with individuals, or I can choose to make it a public thing. Is that a fair comparison?
That's a very good comparison. Yeah.
Okay. And Give Send Go forgot to not make their list of all of the donors and all of their information and the amounts. They forgot to hit the little private ticky box. Am I summing it up okay?
I hope that was the case, that they had just forgotten to tick the box. But if you do use Amazon and you're familiar with it, you would. I'm curious if that wasn't a conscious decision.
Okay. Would you use a financial platform that would forget to ticky box your private data?
No, not at all.
Okay.
That ticky box better be ticky boxed.
One would think. So they didn't ticky box the privacy feature on their data. It became available to everyone. It was shared widely across the internet. Before we get into the nuts and bolts of what we're here to talk about today, how much data are we talking about? So how many donors are we talking about? How much? Give me an idea of the scope of this thing.
It's quite large. Really, we're talking about what amasses to about $8.4 million worth of donations. And it really, it's somewhere around, I think it was 96,000 donors. A huge chunk of the data set. I know that it's not the entire data set that was shared publicly. The folks that did end up capturing all this data, their name is DDoS leaks, or DDoS secrets, sorry, and they've been kind of giving some of this data to journalists and researchers. I haven't been in receipt. I have contacted them asking if they would be willing to share with me. I haven't heard back from them yet, but it would be nice to, because it'd be nice to have a complete data set. But from what was released, it's a sizable portion of the donations that occurred from, I believe it was February 1st to February 10th.
Okay. So let's sort of start very high level, and then we'll work our way down to the more provincial stuff. From a very high level, Who was giving money to the convoy, and where were they from?
There was a large amount of people from all over the world. Actually, when we're talking about it, it's 51% of the donations came from Canada, so domestic donations, or so we think. 43% of that was American, and then we've got an amount that there was $200,000 in a donation that has no data recorded with it whatsoever. It just has null fields, meaning they're empty fields. And just the only note with it is that it says process but not recorded. We don't know what that is. Give Send Go, Give Send Go has not given any information about what that could be. Just that it's there. So in terms of when I look at this data and how I would say it's dirty data, really. For this company to comply with Canada's Fintrac would be very difficult. They're missing postal codes. We've got donations from Hunter Biden at the White House, which clearly, of course, is not the case. We've got a Justin Trudeau at the Parliament also donating. So people are putting in fake addresses, fake names, and for some reason, their credit card processor Stripe was letting all these things go through. Stripe is a very reputable payment processor online, so it does concern me about how this data was stored and captured. It wasn't validated whatsoever.
Okay. Now you mentioned something called Fintrac. What is that?
So Fintrac is part of basically monitoring the movement of money in Canada. Banks are required to comply with it. So if you bring in $10,000 worth of cash or more, they're required to do what's called a large cash transaction report, and that goes off to Fintrac. Normally, it's just it's not to monitor what you're doing, but it's to monitor patterns of behavior that might indicate something nefarious going on. So that's about all I know about Fintrac, but they do need to have information like who you are, what your address is, all that other stuff. Give Send Go would have a hard time complying.
Okay. So 51% came from Canada. Where else in the world did it?
Great Britain, there was about $77,000 that came out of Great Britain. Australia chipped in about $34,000. Denmark, surprisingly, Chile donated about $11,000, and the Netherlands topped off the $10,000 list there. So really, it's a sizable list from all over the world. And that's the other thing too, is when I look at this map. In terms of the data as well, apparently they received a donation from Antarctica as well, and I'm wondering how that would have worked as well. So it's very curious about how we have to look at this data and say, yes, these are real people, hopefully, but there's a little bit of a grain of salt when it comes to some of this international activity. I would say the U.S. is probably pretty accurate. Around the world, though, addresses don't always comply. So I take some of that with a grain of salt. Maybe some of these top 10, countries I would be, more comfortable with reporting on. But when we get into the smaller amounts, there's probably some data errors in it too.
I would hope so, because I got to be honest, man. I wouldn't have expected that Morgan Freeman and the Penguins would have that big of a stake in the Freedom Convoy, but you never know. Now, you did some pretty in-depth analysis in regards to correlations between donors, and I'm going to exclude the Penguins and Hunter Biden from that, if that's okay. But you did some analysis in regards to how these donations lined up with previous political donations at the federal level and at the provincial level. So let's talk about the federal level first. What did you notice? What did you find? What jumped out at you?
So the great thing is at the federal level is that you can go online and you can go to the Elections Canada website and download all of the federal political donations over $250 going back to 2004 in one file. Though it weighs about 2.6 gigabytes, it's not very workable unless you throw it into a database. It's a lot of information. So I was able to go back and trace some of these these folks that donated to the convoy, some of their federal donation activity all the way back to 2004. And I think, what did I have? Something like 54 donations that I was able to trace back all the way to 2004. And even back there, it wasn't just the Conservative Party, which we would assume. I mean, my political bias is probably showing here, but there was also, folks that had donated to the Liberal Party as well, the Green Party, and the NDP Party federally.
Let's talk about how that breakdown works, because there's a couple of graphics that I'm going to throw on the screen in post editing magic, but there's a couple of graphics when it comes to the federal level that they seem to be pretty telling. So when we take a look at the political parties that received donations, I mean, it kind of looks like a Pac-Man that's just a little bit off to the side, but this Pac-Man is very blue. So what percentage of donations came from people? I mean, you said your political bias. You would expect to see a lot of conservative donations, and it certainly appears that there were. What percentage of donations? How did it break down between the parties federally?
Overall, using all of that data from 2004 to 2021, we're looking at about 85% that came from donors that also donated to the federal Conservative Party. So
Okay.
that's really telling. Another 5%, just about 6%, came from folks that donated to the People's Party, the PPC. And then right after that, we've got 2% to the NDP, which is really curious to me, because now we've got folks on both sides of the spectrum. But of course, the largest pie or piece of the pie is the Conservative Party.
And I gotta say, it doesn't surprise me too much that the Conservatives would be one of the biggest, because one of the criticisms that we've heard quite a bit about the federal Conservative parties is that a lot of their messaging is tailored not to the electorate, not to the majority of Canadians, but to the people who donate the most. So it makes sense in a way to me that you would see, if you've got all of these hyper engaged people who are going to donate the hell out of stuff, it would make sense to me that if they were going to donate, they would donate from a conservative standpoint. But what I found really interesting about the data that you shared with me is some of the biggest numbers aren't conservative donors. So the biggest one, and tell me if I'm reading this wrong, because I'm not good at numbers or data or math or much of anything really. But the biggest donor was $60,000, and that was donated to the convoy by somebody who also donated. And I mean, I imagine the NDP is feeling kind of screwed, because if they had that much disposable income, the 1.7 or the $1,700 that the NDP got pales in comparison to the $60,000 that this person gave to the convoy. But the top, of the top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of the top 6 donors, 5 of them are NDP.
Yeah, it's really curious. When you talk about that, the way that the data is represented is that you'll see one line for one person. So it's not their individual donations. So in that case, that $60,000 actually was linked to 3 different donations to the NDP, all in Ontario, of course. So it's actually really curious to see that, this guy had $60,000 to burn in his pocket, but also sits on the left side of the spectrum. I'm not sure how to draw any conclusions to that, unless these have been really difficult last couple of years, last 3 years, and sometimes I guess maybe this was they saw freedom and it resonated with him. I'm not sure, or them. I'm not sure if it's a him or he, but you just don't know. I'd really be curious to know, what was the thought process behind donating to the convoy and also supporting a federal NDP. It just to me seems absolutely backwards.
I'm curious how much. Well, I mean, the charts are colored. I'm colorblind, so I have a bear of a time reading them. But I'm curious, one of the things that has been talked about a lot in social media and mainstream media is the fact that you've got the far right that is invested in these freedom movements, but the horseshoe comes all the way back around, and you have a lot of the Greens involved in them as well. How much of the total donations federally did we see from the Green Party?
It wasn't as much. About $43,000 of the convoy money was linked to about $85,000, $86,000 in federal dollars for donations. Yeah.
So not very much at all.
Not very much at all. No, they came in behind the NDP. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's that horseshoe thing, right?
I think it's important to underscore, though, that even when we were talking about the fact that there were some apparent NDP supporters and apparent Green supporters and some apparent Liberal supporters that donated to the convoy, the overwhelming majority comes from the Conservative Party of Canada.
Yeah.
Was there anything about the Conservative Party of Canada donations that jumped out at you?
You know what? It was interesting. Going through, I saw a lot of support for Leslie Lewis, which is no surprise to me. Aaron O'Toole was also a recipient of a lot of dollars from these same folks, and as well, who was it? Maxime Bernier when he was with the CPC. Was one of the top three as well. So, it says a lot. Aaron O'Toole was also, soon to be the leader or was the leader of the CPC at the time and threw out this data. So that's no surprise there that the leader would receive an amount of money more. But of course, Leslie Lewis being a very prominent voice, it's very curious to see those particular fringe names come up, or with fringe opinions come up. It definitely shows that that resonates with some folks.
One of the other things that you took a look at as well was the provincial, specific to Alberta, right?
Yeah, yeah. So far, just
so what did you? I mean, it's far less Pac-Man-y for the most part. There is the one pie chart, and all of this I'll throw up on the screen and post. But it's much more diversified, shall I say? Am I reading that right?
Yeah. So it's difficult to really get the provincial data is okay. They could take some ideas from the feds in terms of how to present the data, but that's another conversation. I was able to break it down through different, through time. And really, it's not surprising to me that 80% of the folks that, or 80% of the donation money provincially also went to the UCP with this as well. So, being that we have really, right now, it looks like a two-party system in Alberta. I'm not surprised to see the NDP coming up with, about 17 or 20% of the pie, considering just how small fry a lot of these other parties are in Alberta.
Now, when we're going through the provincial data, there are a couple of things that struck me. So the biggest one, I think, is when we start to talk about the big numbers. It is a fairly consistent mix of the Conservative Party, the NDPs, and I got to say, to my surprise, the Alberta Party is in the top 10 for donation size, which I imagine they've got to be pretty choked at because their donations haven't exactly been crushing it.
No.
What are sort of your big takeaways from the provincial stuff?
For me, it really makes a lot of sense why we've got the rhetoric that we're getting from our provincial government, it really isn't surprising now seeing the same representation here in this data, that these are constituents that these MLAs went to visit down at the border. That doesn't surprise me now. Is it right? No. I would say that it really, just by and large, this doesn't surprise me. This is really what I was expecting to see out of this data when I, on the outset, of working on this. And it just really just puts some visualizations to the fact that, these are the priorities of this government and the MLAs that make it up.
What's going on with Jeremy Nixon's riding there?
Right?
Because there's some big. I mean, whoever donated to the convoy maxed out their provincial donations, but they dropped, if I'm reading this right, $15,000 on the convoy.
Yeah, two people. Yeah, they both contributed $4,000 to the province, but yeah, $15,000 between the two of them went to the convoy. Who has that kind of money just to chip in to people driving across the country? To some road trip. I have a hard time understanding it. There's some big money in Alberta, certainly. There's some big money in Ontario as well in this as well. But the big money, to me, it says a lot.
It's fascinating to see. Like, here's one of my takeaways as I was reading this, because you've sent me 2 iterations of this now, and one of the biggest things for me is, for as much as Alberta claims about being extraordinarily hard done by, damn, we've got some disposable income. Because, I mean, what was the total amount for money that was donated from Alberta to the convoy, which I think is important to highlight as well? There was only about 20% of Albertans who voiced support for the Freedom Convoy insurrection, whatever we want to call it.
Yeah, sedition. I'm not sure. We'll find out how this plays out. But in terms of Alberta, but we chipped in. I hate to say chipped in $410,000 to the convoy.
So almost $500,000 came from Alberta.
Yeah.
Do you know what province gave the most?
Yeah, Ontario did.
Oh, good.
Ontario about $700,000 and almost $800,000.
That makes me feel better on its face, but I immediately go to my head. If you break that down per capita, I have a feeling I'm not going to be in love with the new answer.
No. In terms, and then of course, you can break it down by, what was the Sunshine Cities as well out of this too. And you'll be probably not surprised to know that Calgary made number 1. But right behind Toronto, Vancouver, and then Edmonton. So it's really just, it's confirming a lot of biases that I had, which I really wanted to be wrong, but I'm not.
So Calgary and Edmonton are in the top 4.
They are.
So we're winning then.
That's we win a lot of things in Alberta.
Could we win some different ones, do you think?
I would like to.
I think there's a lot of people who would. The other thing that I found interesting is that when you broke it down by who received it, so you broke it down by party, and then you broke it down by the constituencies who got the largest contributions. There's one that does surprise me in there a little bit, and that was Banff. Banff did a lot.
Banff did a lot. Yeah, that's really, it was only about $800 to the convoy, but they did donate a lot to the UCP, to a tune of $3,700. So when you have these folks banging on the door of your constituency office or blowing up your email inbox and you make that correlation as an MLA to your folks that you see as supporters. You might listen to their opinions a little louder than Joe Schmo on the street. Being that there's obviously a relationship here between the constituent and the MLA.
Were there any constituencies that didn't have anyone?
That didn't have any donations? There probably were. I haven't quite synthesized it down to that level yet. Actually, I could tell you for absolute certain that Edmonton Strathcona had absolutely zero donations.
Big surprise there.
Yeah, big surprise there.
I was just looking at the constituency that I live in, and unsurprisingly, there was. I mean, it wasn't a lot donated to the convoys, so that's nice. But the name that's attached to it does not shock me in the slightest. So there's that. Is there anything else that has kind of jumped out at you about the data? Is there more? Like, I know that you reached out to the very oddly named person who has all of the data. I would love to know who gives that name to their child. But is there any other pieces that you're waiting for? Is there still more work that you're doing?
Well, my hope is that I do get an answer from that organization. DDoS Secrets is that has it. They're actually, if you look, their website does explain that they are a group of journalists, researchers. They are backed by a university as well. So, there's some governing body behind this group, and they are responsible for quite a few of these publicly obtained, legally obtained, for all intents and purposes, data, just for the sake of, because there are names in this and that there's postal codes and zip codes, they're making sure that they're vetting everyone that could possibly get this data. For me, I'm curious to start going through some data from Ontario, start seeing what that looks like, because of course I want to see some of the top 3, maybe top 4 provinces in the country, and maybe hope to glean some information for folks to see, like, okay, so what about my riding? Why is my MLA or MPP or MP or what your elected official, why are they why do they express the opinions that they are about the convoy, potentially, and is it because it's linked to an amount of money? If it's a powerful donor, that's definitely something that I'd like to look at, because for me, it's I think that there needs to be proportional representation of all constituents and their opinions, but of course, with the benefit of governing for all of their constituents and not just for your top 10 donors that happen to think that a convoy across the country is really going to solve anything.
Okay. What are your thoughts? I mean, like, one of the things that keeps jumping out to me is almost half. I mean, it's 51-49% for what came from Canada, what came outside of Canada. I have a lot of questions for the 51%, the Canadians that represent that 51% who financed an attempted insurrection. I have some questions for them. But, the thing that alarms me even more, I think, is the fact that 49% of the funding for these people who created a nationwide crisis, to the extent of which that the Emergencies Act was invoked, that comes from outside of Canada. What do you make of that?
I think there needs to be some real hard looks at it. When we do have organizations like this that occur, we need to really start looking at, how do we protect our domestic interests from, this kind of powerful money. It makes me curious about, how much of this money was not legitimate dollars that maybe came from, other organizations that probably aren't exactly above water. That's my concern. Of course, I wouldn't be able to really process that as an individual. But I'm sure that there's looks at that. And this is the interesting thing, is that we clearly did see foreign influence on this, as we had elected officials in the United States encouraging people to donate to this effort. And then, of course, to go to the even higher level of then harnessing cryptocurrencies to get around, some of the real reasons why we have protections in our monetary system. It's the motivation there internationally really needs to be looked at. It's a real concern.
Yeah, I'm curious. Did any money come from Russia?
It is highlighted in blue, I can tell you that much. In terms of how much, I can just take a look here, because we do know that there has been reporting on some of the first reporting on the convoy was coming out of Russia Today, and in terms of monetary, I am only seeing about $578 coming from Russia. But of course, how much of that was, then that's directly from a Russian address, potentially. Again, is that a legitimate address? I wouldn't be, certain. But, how much of that money was maybe Russian origin, but funneled through Great Britain or through the United States somehow too.
Or perhaps Antarctica.
Or perhaps the penguins in Antarctica. Who really, how do you put a penguin up on trial?
Those damned Russian penguins.
Oh, the worst.
Which is funny because it's on the other end of the globe from Russia, so you would think there wouldn't be a lot of affiliation, but there's clearly questions to be asked. What's I gotta ask, like this has from our exchanges, this has not been a small component of your time. What's the motivation? Like, I'll be honest. When the data leak happened, or when it was presented publicly, I initially was a little bit like, oh, how is this illegal? Am I going to have people coming to my house? And once I saw that there were enough people that were doing it that I probably had cover, I took a look at it. But my interest was largely limited to who are the names that I know, who are the big names, and oh, please God, let there be none of my friends on here. Fortunately, I have almost no friends, so I was able to escape that one. But like, what motivated you to do such a deep dive on this?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually, because I probably haven't asked myself that question. And now that I'm thinking about it, you're right. I have put a lot of time into this. It really stemmed from about the same curiosity as you, Nate. I found that I wanted to make sure, number one, I didn't have any family on it. Number two, I didn't have any friends on it. And like you, very few friends, so that's good. And then I was curious about there seems to be a lot of MLAs that were very vocal in support of this. So and then all of a sudden, the Emergencies Act was enacted. Oh, it's an overreach, and this is no big deal. And it really felt to me like, oh, there's got to be something someone's hiding somewhere. And so I started digging into it, and then I started seeing patterns, and I wanted to know how much money was from here, from there, and just the questions started to pour into my head about, what can I do with this data to glean some information. So one of the pieces that I looked at was patterns in dollars. So, the $14 donations or the $88 donations, actually turns out those are numeric symbols of hate, which is really, an interesting piece. There was a significant amount of money or donations that were $14 or $88. And, it shows that there's extremist views in these folks. I personally don't donate $14 or $88 to an organization. It's generally $15, $25, $50, round numbers. So to say that, these $14 donations or $88 donations are a coincidence when we've got as many as we did in this data, I found very interesting, so I continued from there and went, okay, so, you know, let's start linking the folks, the names of these people and the postal codes of these people to potentially federal donations. What's their actual political bias? So what's their where do they sit on the spectrum? And of course I wasn't surprised, and I don't think anyone would be surprised because of the way that they represented themselves, even in Ottawa and at Coots. Um, and yeah, it just kind of went from there. I do some data engineering for my living, and using the tools that I did was pretty familiar. So it was just a matter of kind of spending a little bit of time in the evening before bed to kind of just pick at it and keep synthesizing and analyzing, and eventually you end up with some visualizations that tell a story, and that's really what I was hoping to do.
You know, I can't help but think. I mean, the fact that there were extremist elements tied to the convoy. I mean, we saw the Diagolon patches out of Coots, where people have been charged with conspiracy to commit murder. We've certainly seen some of the convoy organizers, as much as some of the convoy organizers have tried to say, no, those people weren't convoy organizers. They were, and they're also people who are almost, I would, from a grifting standpoint, I would almost call them professional agitators, in that they lock onto these causes and then they use the buzzwords in order to get paid. But do you think that there's a lesson in here for? I'm sure that there are some people who donated to the convoy, not in denominations of 14 or 88, which is, to be clear, horrifying and gross and a whole other problem that we have to deal with. But I'm sure that there were people who were just like, yeah, freedom is good. I like freedom. It's a freedom convoy. I mean, it's a hell of a brand. I've said that before. Do you think that there's a lesson for people that they need to be much more mindful about what they donate to and what they tie themselves to? Because the branding of these causes has gotten so much more sophisticated. I mean, back in the day, as I date myself, if white supremacists wanted to go for a march, they called it a white supremacist march, and they went for a march, and a bunch of people met them and counter marched. Now it seems like there's a lot of groups who are couching themselves in these terms of freedom, in these terms of liberty, and all of the things because they're more appealing, but it doesn't change what they're ultimately after. Should be, I guess, my question, to get all of the words that I just threw up there out of the way. Should people be more mindful about what they're supporting, especially when it comes to donating money through a financial organization that can't ticky box the privacy option?
And the interesting thing about that too is that there was an option to make your donation anonymous, much like GoFundMe does as well. But of course, if you don't protect the data that's behind it, there's no point in even ticking the anonymous box if the company isn't protecting your data. I certainly agree that you need to be careful about who, understand who you're donating to, what the dollars are being used for. When I start seeing how quickly that the GoFundMe initially had, and then how quickly the Give Send Go, amassed millions of dollars, it starts to, you would think that someone would say, "Whoa, this is a lot of money for some truckers to drive across the country. Like, what's going on here?" And even looking at the organizers and doing some research on their backgrounds, even before the convoy left, it was very clear that there was links to a fringe right political party. So you have to do a little bit of research, do a quick Google search, and I mean, the whole do your research thing in another situation is a problem, depending on where you look. But when you're trying to figure out who a person is and what an organization is, a quick search to figure out what's happening with them in their past is probably something you should be considering doing. If it's not a reputable organization, I'm thinking the cancer societies and the MS societies and things like that. I mean, of course, like, here's my money. But when it's a private organizer, doing these fundraisers, I would be making sure that I do my damnedest to vet whoever I'm sending this money to, because it's my hard-earned dollars. And I would assume that's the same case for a lot of these folks too, I would hope. And, now to see what it's become, I hope that folks do, have us have a reconsider of how they donate in the future, for sure. And I mean, there's been repercussions already from the data that, we've seen folks fired over being donating to the convoys. So, it very real. The repercussions of backing something like this, I think is very real, and you need to be careful.
There's, like I said, I like to give the benefit of the doubt to people to some degree, and I think that there probably were people who were involved in the convoy who aren't monsters. But like, I can't help but think, given the heavy involvement of some people who are very, very racist, I can't help but feel like one of the takeaways should maybe be don't give money to racists.
I mean, as a I'm a cis white male, so I can't say that I'm the perfect non-racist. There's always stuff I need to work on that way. But I think that it's very fair to say that, if you're a racist, you're probably more likely to donate to a racist organization. It's the same thing as, we saw the swastikas down in Ottawa and down in Coutts, and I've seen them in the convoys here in Edmonton. And it's there's a German saying, an old German saying, that says that if there's 10 people sitting at a table with a Nazi, you have 11 Nazis at the table.
Yeah.
And that's just the reality of it. And the same thing goes with the Diagolon folks. If you tolerate these people being in your movement, there's a problem. And this is the same thing that goes with protests on the left too. If you tolerate, these folks being at your rally, what are you doing?
Yeah. I have two unrelated questions for you. So the first one is, what do you do when you're not crunching data involving attempted national insurrections?
I'll keep it vague. I work in IT, and I do a little bit of data analysis for what I do, in my waking hours when I'm being paid for it. So it's yeah. So I mean, this technology is a little bit unsurprising or easy to use for me. It's something that I use in my paid life.
Okay. Last question for you. Only because you're here, and I was hoping you might be able to provide a little bit of a clarification. You host something called Canadian Space.
Yeah, okay.
Is what's on your bio. And I know I'm probably not the only person, but there's been this video going around of the International Space Station, and I see everybody going, "Oh my gosh," or "Yikes," and I have no idea what I'm looking at. So, can you just explain to me why why is that a thing that people should be paying attention to?
Yeah. So Canadian Space is a pet project of mine that I haven't had time to really put enough energy into here in the last about a year, where I've been trying to do some deep dives into the history of Canada in space and what we've contributed. So they really turn into research papers, and then I have to dial it back to a half an hour video. But in terms of the video that's making its rounds, it's actually what Russia is calling a comical illustration of Russia leaving the International Space Station with all of its hardware. And there's a lot of things that are wrong with that video. I would talk One thing is that one of the modules they take, though Russia did contribute that module, NASA actually owns it, so they couldn't actually take it. Uh, so that's fair. But the moment that Russia would undock from the International Space Station, if they could, they would be surrounded in darkness because they wouldn't be connected to the main power, the solar panels and the batteries. They would have half an hour maybe of power before their own batteries would fail. So there isn't a lot of without them launching a life support module. They wouldn't spend a lot of time up there as an individual space station. There's one clip of where the Russian segment is undocked, and all of a sudden the International Space Station makes a sudden plummet, down in altitude. Of course, that's not going to happen. One concern that I do have right now is we do have an American astronaut that is scheduled to land on the Soyuz MS-19 into Kazakhstan, and there's some concerns about how he would be able to get home to America. And that's I think he's supposed to land on March 19th. So there is some concern about that. Thankfully, they do land in Kazakhstan as opposed to Russia, so there probably is some leeway there. But that video itself is definitely a high yikes, mostly because it does definitely shows an intent for that Russia is considering pulling out of the International Space Station, which does have some longer term risks for the actual mission itself.
Okay, so if I was to say that it's a badly manufactured propaganda video with some alarming subtext, would I be summing it up okay?
I think that's probably fair.
Okay, cool. Because I've seen so many people retweeting that and going, "Oh my god!" And I've been like, "It's in space."
In space,
I can tell.
Chad, I want to thank you so much for taking time to chat with us today. I want to thank you for doing all. I mean, you're not getting. Maybe you should set up a Give Send Go.
No, I this has been mostly to quell my own curiosity, right? So, it's been an interesting trip, just kind of learning more about the data and how it all kind of comes together and what relationships we can glean from it. And I'm sure there's much more we can do with it. I know there's other folks just in Alberta that are, clamoring through it, looking for links with people that may have affiliations with different parties, may be that they helped with campaigns or what have you as well. So there's a lot of that work being done, and I look forward to, hopefully if this inspires somebody to continue the work, I'd be thrilled about it. It's definitely, there's a lot to learn and there's a lot to understand as a society out of this, that what can we do to make sure that everyone's voices are heard, but we don't get to a point that's just so extreme. There's so many ways we can figure things out as a society, and this is not it.
If people want to follow on your data journey, what's the best way for people to do that?
I'm pretty active on Twitter. You can find me just at Chad Ohman on Twitter, and that's about all.
Awesome, cool. Well, thank you again, Chad, and I'll be definitely following closely. And if you find anything else super spicy, please let us know, because we would love to have you back on.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thanks, man. As always, if you appreciate the kind of content that we're trying to produce here at The Breakdown, we would love it if you swung by our Patreon page at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab and signed up for a small monthly sponsorship of the work that we're trying to do here. It is because of the support that we receive from our Patreon sponsors that we're able to continually up our game, and it is tremendously appreciated. So I want to throw a big thank you out to them, and you can go ahead and visit that website and join and support us as well, because we need all the help we can get. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you so much for listening and being part of these important conversations, and we will see you next time on The Breakdown.